My name is Lex Gator. Not a lot of people know that. But then, why should they? I am an explorer, a cryptid version. I am on the track of unknown animals. So as I start my YouTube journey with you, I am going to discuss probably the most famous of them all. Yes, Nessie. That is, the Loch Ness monster, which is not a monster at all, but merely a large, unclassified creature allegedly living in the loch. So I could start with the dimensions of the creature, the loch, and drone on about St. Columba. Yeah, usual stocking fillers, but hey, Google it. But if you want a new take on it, yeah, something different, keep it here. There are many bullcap theories on how Nessie, and indeed over 100 other lake monsters, got into these bodies of water. Some located deep inland that no ice age can explain it. But hold on a tick, let's reference the best evidence. Look, the Holy Bible and 50 other religions from around the world speak of a global flood that only one family survived from. So, let's factor in Noah's flood. So, should we believe that Nessie was on the ark? Well then, would any other marine creature, in fact anything that could swim at length, be wasting valuable space on the ark? Come on, common sense gives is the obvious answer. It's a big fat no. No way. A case of sink or swim. Right, so the Bible says the rains came down, but it also says the waters came up from the ground. Now the fact is that the Earth's crust has huge amounts of water flowing through it, so yes, this was a possibility. Let's run with that then. Now we have this scenario. On the land, water is covering everything, but at sea, the sea level is also rising to meet the height of the land masses, alive or dead. Land animals are being taken out to sea, and the mud-heavy waters are flowing off into the sea and dropping off the shores, burying not just animals, but pushing sea fauna upwards while they try and escape the underwater mudslides. But the surface is heading inland and taking the marine creatures with it. At this part, I should point out that plesiosaurs and a few other strange prehistoric creatures did prowl the ancient shores of this world. So we will assume safely that these plesies are heading inland fast from all directions. The floodwaters diving into lower points around the globe, creating huge lakes and taking with it from the seas some of the fish diets that the plesies had enjoyed out at sea. But remember, these were all saltwater creatures and are now getting trapped inland as they avoid the chaos at the surface and adopt a lower level of existence in the water. The water is draining away. Fate sealed. But not doomed. The water would desalinate over time, but what of the way these creatures appear to not to need to intake air at the surface often? Now that has confused the pundits for a while. There is an old book on this subject, The Great Orm of Loch Ness. I should explain that orm was an Old English word for worm, and the late F.W. Holliday, the author, contended that this creature was some form of mollusk. I for one do agree with most of his assertions. However, there is even photographic suggestions of nostrils, and by the way, mollusk breathe through their skin. That is, worms, snails and slugs. So, is there two types in the loch? There has, over the years, been varying descriptions of things in the loch. A diver even claimed to have seen a giant frog underwater. If my idea of the flood is correct, and possibly we will never know, then there is no reason why more than one type could not be swept into any given area. Cohabitation would depend on conflict, food resources, and territorialism. And we should also consider ecomorphing and crossbreeding, causing a perfect adaptation for a new species to survive. Now many experts say that there is not enough food available. But do you know that crocs can go a year without eating? The LNM has been seen very active during the salmon run. Okay guys, at this point you may be thinking, and I hope you are, heck, this guy makes some interesting points, but on what authority does he speak? Does he have a PhD? Well, yes, I do, actually. It's a personally hyped distinction, just like the guys who have real PhDs. Listen up. Do not think you have to have PhDs. Those guys debunk these creatures, and yet, how many of them get out there to check it out? So do that, get out there, and check it out for yourselves. Do not think your opinion or eyewitness is less because you have not written a book or not been on TV. Get out there. You never know your luck. Please take the cap off the camera. So now you are probably thinking, nice advice. But talk is cheap. Has he even been to Loch Ness? Actually, yes I have. 5 times. I bet you want to know what happened. Well okay, I am going to tell you and also give you my opinions as usual, but hey, at least I have been there. Firstly, let me tell you, when you spend the first couple of hours staring at those dark waters, a strange thought enters even the most ardent of believers. I, for one, am an ardent believer, and you will soon know why. I was 16 when I got my first Loch Ness book. It was The Great Orme of Loch Ness. It was not the plesiosaur that I wanted to hear of, but it made sense. Mr. F.W. Holliday certainly thought for himself and did not go with the popular theories. Nonetheless, the true nature of the LNM is yet to be determined. So back to my trips to the Loch from London, UK. It was 1987, and I drove up with a work colleague. We will call him Steve G. We arrived at the door's end of the Loch. There were no sat-navs, so to be honest, we knew not where we were. That is, which end of the Loch we were at. Yeah, dumbass expedition. So as you reach the Loch, you can go right or left. We chose right correctly, so now we are opposite doors, and we come across a large concrete walled lay-by, which we pull into. I with a shoulder-held cam. Got out and G had a 1960s Super 8 Cine cam. Haha, told you. We were a bit underfunded and dumbass. Anyways, I kid you not, I had barely looked across at doors on the other side, and there just offshore sitting in the water is a dark hump with something sticking straight out at one end. I jumped up and down with excitement and started filming. I should say it's been on YouTube for a while. But yeah, the quality was lousy. That said, it was real. Now later that morning we were cruising at an elevated position around the Loch, when G hurriedly pointed to the Loch. I was driving, so I glanced to my right, huge hump offshore. Even stranger was a man filming it. I looked in my rear mirror and there were other cars following. And believe me, still kick myself. Instead of stopping and pointing it out, I wimped out and tried to get a lay-by that never appeared. By then it was way out of sight. So this was August 8, 1987, also visited in April 1989, a sort of spur-of-the-moment trip, as my brother had offered me the use of his hired new XJS Jaguar. So, what better than a jaunt to Inverness? Left 8 p.m. Friday, 2 hours sleep by the Loch, drove on to Plonkton on the west coast. This was all a solo trip. Then back for 11 p.m. Sat evening, completely uneventful regarding Nessie. But heck, 1367 miles in a new XJS. Wow. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to back it up a bit. Forgot my crucial 1988 trip, again about to go to Inverness at 8 p.m. Friday, when my bro offers me the use of his hire Merc's 190e car. Heck yeah. Thanks. Off I went. This time, like 1987, I had the shoulder-held Panasonic cam with me. Yeah, a solo trip. So news reports were that Inverness was experiencing heavy rain for days. Heck yeah. The water was rushing under the bridge at River Ness. I mean, like, just under. So I get to that lay-by opposite doors, look across. Guess what? It's there again. I ain't kidding you. I looked at it and went, nah, can't be, not again, didn't even try filming it. Like I said at the early part of the vid, even though I had these experiences at Loch Ness, when you look at those dark waters, it leaves you wondering, can there really be anything big living in there? And yet you know what you saw. The place is strange. So the rest of the 88 trip yielded nothing. I also went there with my 2 rough collie dogs in the summer of 2006, who were females. There was the gold one, Tiffany, and then the tricolour named Pandora. This second one had many times shown signs of being aware of spirit activity, and many pets can be sensitive to the paranormal. Stay with me, this is very relevant to what transpires. Okay, so this time I had a digi-cam. Yeah, it's old tech now I know, but it had a 33x zoom if I remember well. I bought various cans of fish as bait, and off we went, arriving at the loch early at 5 a.m. Doors side this time, left the estate car up in the lay-by, and we went down to the stony beach. Urquhart Castle opposite and to my left. I mixed the fish, and it was the oily versions. Put them in a bag, made small holes in it, then chucked it on the fringe of the shallows. And you know, in minutes my mind had wandered to looking across the loch and forgot about what I had just done. Then I hear growling. To my right, Pandora was on a boulder staring out. Yeah, drama. So I am just 25 feet from the spot that I threw the bag, and it's the spot my dog's growling at. I take a few steps back. Yeah, fear started entering me, like if this creature is 40 feet or more long. Well, I was feeling a bit vulnerable. Lifted the cam. Heart in my mouth. Then, nothing. Wretched anticlimax. So we walked slowly to my left. I kept looking at my dog and the water. She kept looking at the water and twisting her nose, but not snarling. So where is this going, you are wondering? Well, nowhere on that day, but, and it's a thought-provoking but, they have had psychics at the loch, and guess what? Yep, more sightings. So where's this going, eh? Well, when my dog was standing on the rock, I believe she picked up the sonar beam of Nessie, who was on the edge of the shallows, sending up an echolocation for the oily fish. The angle caught my dog. You know, it's kind of strange, because I put this theory to Adrian Shine after he rang me and asked me to send my footage of 1987 to him. Way back then. And just a couple years ago, there's this guy on YouTube who was flying a drone and it caught Nessie by the shore underwater, doing what I thought had happened to my dog years ago. So you ask, what psychics got to do with it? Well, consider this. I believe Nessie uses the white noise frequency. Well, if you are not aware, white noise is what ghost hunters use to pick up ghost voices. Consider the black void of the loch may well be like the black void of the spirit world. I, for one, do not subscribe to ghosts being the spirits of dead humans. I am a Christian, and it's heaven or hell, as per the Holy Bible, after the judgment of the Lord Jesus Christ. So on we go regards this subject of Nessie. So its obvious sight cannot be too effective in those black waters, and therefore it is logical to assume some form of echolocation is being used to get about the loch, and obviously home in on its prey, which is safe to say is fish. So given, if this is true, that explains. You may be thinking, we are straying off the subject of Nessie. No, not at all. One of the more well-known people relating to the story of Nessie is Doc Shields. He allegedly took a photo or two of Morgwa, the Cornish coastal sea creature of myth and legend. But he also took a photo of Nessie's head and neck. That said, many dispute that it's a real pic of Nessie. However, he once hired 3 white witches, and as a Christian, I should now point out, there are no good wizards nor witches, not Harry Potter nor Mary Poppins. Witchcraft is, and always will be, occultism. Make no mistake about it. These witches were naked and tried evoking the Kelpie spirit. That's Nessie. Yep, Kelpie is a Gaelic word for waterhorse or spirit. So consider this. There have been events at the loch where psychics came along and tried bringing the creatures to the surface. But nothing happened. Or did it? Well, a while after the psychics went away, and it was deemed not to work. There were spates of sightings. Why would this be? Well, here is my take on this. We have all had the feeling that someone is watching us from behind. You know the feeling. Hairs on your neck and all that. I think for sure seals know when a polar bear is waiting at an air hole. But they run out of air. So, does Nessie know when human intense gaze is over the loch area? In fact, maybe the psychics have succeeded in drawing in Nessie, but like the seal that fears a predator. She stays down. Does a human stare, even the stare through a camera lens, give off a predatory mental blueprint to these lake creatures? You know, many people have spent hours Nessie watching in the same spot. However, when they went away, passers have claimed to notice something in the loch, which brings me to the next curious thing. Yes, the creature's curiosity. It is often associated with the more gregarious mammalian traits. However, consider the great white shark. It shows a lot more curiosity to shark cages than other sharks, and they have been found to be warm-blooded. Consider that Nessie by most accounts appears to be no supermodel. In fact, quite the contrary, and yet she sticks her head up out of the water, clearly dodging cameras. Therefore, like orcas, she seems to have her own way of spying on things. Orcas, of course, spy hop. There is also the case of Dr. Robert Rines and his 1970s expeditions using strobe cameras. On one occasion, Nessie seems to have bumped the underwater camera rig. I feel sure she did not accidentally do that. Bit like great whites. Tested it. At this point, it should be stressed that I am not inferring Nessie is the danger that great whites have been found to be to swimmers. No. Quite the contrary. Okay, so it's fair to say that Nessie has a level of curiosity. So why do us Nessie hunters find it hard getting her interested in responding? I will tell you why. Because they do not recognize her intelligence. She is not of average intel. I will mention the Lake Champlain Baudet film. The whole film was not released, but the bit that was depicts a long neck passing under the boat and looking back up from under the water at the men on board the boat. Once again, orcas do that as well. A person who has seen the entire film claims, and I mean claims, it's a huge long-necked turtle. Once again, I believe that lake has more than one type of cryptid within its eerie waters. So back to Nessie. They say she sleeps in caves in the sides of the lochs. I have seen many vids and attempts on the loch, but no one has shown us a cave nor sent an ROV into one. But maybe she does sleep in caves. Sonar has more than once caught a large object, either just floating or laying still at the bottom, yet on a second sweep of sonar it's vanished. So, does Nessie have a cloak of invisibility? Actually, maybe she does. Do you know there is a deep layer of silt at the bed of the loch? Does Nessie have the ability to dive into the silt to conceal herself from the irritation of a sonar beam? A beam that she finds predatory and thus evades it, and us. So I just want to back it up a bit here. Just a bit, like the 1970s. You know, there was a great series called Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. It was an episode about lake monsters, for want of a better word. Okay, so one section showed us real footage of a sonar screen. The testimony was this. The skipper and crew had been night Nessie watching using their sonar. The sonar showed two objects that the skipper said was a large 40-foot object, and in its shadow was a 20-foot object. Both were clearly dodging the sonar beam, and he assumed the 20-footer to be an infant. Now, once again, orcas swim with their infants, and a flushing toilet on board had them disappear suddenly. On the subject of the young of these creatures, considering that the long-necked and humped-back versions from lakes around the world are probably of the same phylum, then it's worth mentioning the observation of a lady in South America whose window overlooked the lake, which had supposed creatures in them, and saw one close up. But on this occasion, they were on an island in the lake. She said an adult, which seemed to be the mother, was ashore, and watching the two juveniles play in the water. Yes, play. After a while, they all swam off. But hold on, did she say playing? Heck, never seen crocs, nor gators, nor lizards playing. Once again, mammalian traits. So what should we make of it? Well, for a start, we should question traditional held ideas of what is or is not possible. So-called experts say it cannot be this, because, or it cannot be that, because, or it just cannot be. Okay, whatever. I mean, we don't even know what they are yet. So what is or is not possible is not known till we know. So everyone, please keep an open mind. You do not need qualifications to be a witness. You do have to be honest, rational, and have a true perspective on what you are seeing. And on the subject of perspective, is that not the thing on water that makes it very hard to determine not just size? Use this criteria. Go to the loch or any other cryptid zone with the idea of not trying to become part of its story, but for it to become part of your personal story. Then maybe, just maybe, you will find satisfaction in trying to bring the creature and not yourself to the forefront, and in doing that, you may well become a long-term part of its story, its legend. So let's get back to trying to find out the true nature of Nessie. She has another trait. Yep, what appears to be basking. Indeed, yes. There are many accounts of that now legendary humpback just laying on the surface, not even moving for a long time. What on earth is shy Nessie doing? Maybe she is heating herself up on warm days, but she has also been seen doing this on inclement days. So is she just chillin'? I think not. Maybe she is asleep. But that hump has seen unaffected by the water flow, and it has even moved against the water flow. Well, what do I think, you may be wondering? Well, my guess is obviously as good as anyone else's, but let's have a think. Okay. Here goes. Aesthetics. It's a trait of higher intels. I mean, is she not entitled just to enjoy lazing at the surface? It may well be the same reason she sometimes swims neck out of the water, maybe even a territorial display. And the heck knows who to. Let's look at that issue. So are there any instances of aggression being displayed? Well, if Nessie displays angst by blocking, then yes, a case of a military boat hitting an object mid-lock during the war, and an unusual wave in front of a speed attempt resulting in death in the latter case. Coincidence? Maybe. But remember, Nessie is normally rather shy, and motorboats make plenty of noise. She could get out of the way. Now, I refer to her as she, but you know, even shy deer who will normally run away. The males, at a certain rutting time, will challenge most things, obviously including other large males. So, consider Nessie learnt by pain and injury to avoid boats. Does Nessie even have real aggression? Well, I have read of a case, and how true this account may be, who knows? But consider, nearly all accounts of cryptids are anecdotal. So some guy baits a barrel with meat and bull's blood and set it adrift. Guess what? Nothing happened. Then what? What else? He went away. Days later, someone made a report of two long-necked creatures in the loch fighting over the barrel. Now either someone was having the rest of us over a barrel, or Nessie is capable of aggression, or is territorial. So the barrel drifted and a dispute over ownership ensued. So what are these territories in Loch Ness? What are their favorite haunts? Where are the most sightings? Once again, I am going to back up. On the subject of waves, you know orcas, them again, gang together and charge at a seal on an ice floe. They create a wave that shoves the seal into the water. So, how many types of whale thrash the water or tail slap? I am not suggesting it is the same type of animal, but one of the newest cryptids, that is, the Florida sea monster, has video of it doing the same thing. Does Nessie also thrash the waters? Witness reports from China, Japan and Lake Okanagan suggest these creatures do indeed do this. And if we take a look at the 1970s Unexplained series with Robert Stack presenting it, well, there is a slow-motion section of a reddish-brown something. Yes, that something is thrashing the water out on the lake. They ran it in slow motion. What we see is a huge diamond-shaped paddle come out of the water and splash back in. At normal speed, it was not visible. So just maybe these lake unknowns also used the surface to splash about on. And maybe the much-maligned witnesses who were accused of filming just waves were doing just that. But filming the waves caused by these creatures who possibly even use waves as camouflage. Unbelievable, maybe. But who would believe orcas would line up and charge a seal to create a wave? And on the subject of reddish-brown objects, consider this. Back in the UK, when I was, about 21, maybe 22, I was watching the ITN news at 10 p.m. It was half-hour long, and at the end they would have a brief, light-hearted bit of news. Okay, so this is what they showed. Somewhere in, I think, the Caribbean, or it could have been the Bahamas. Anyway, the seawater was clear blue. A man claimed he often would witness these two plesiosaur-like creatures basking on the surface while he was microlighting. But on this occasion he took a camera. We get to see exactly that. The newscaster, Reginald Bosanquet, points out that their backs break the surface periodically, but when the micro's shadow came over them, they went in an instant. So now I am going to describe to you from memory. What I saw, I kid you not, their plan view, was typical plesiosaur. 4 huge diamond-shaped paddles, front ones slightly larger than the rear. Long neck, but not elasmosaur-like long, and they drooped their neck and head down like they were sleeping, and a short tail, reddish-brown, and while I will not divulge my true age, I will say this was probably 1980 or 1981, so you will realize, no CGI and no Photoshop, and in any case, the news would not have shown it if they thought it was fake. People were more incredulous in those days. Now, due to Photoshop and CGI, it's harder to prove things, as you may well know. So now let's talk about the so-called territories that I was going to tell you about. From the top, south side, Dawes, Inverfarry Gaig, bottom, Fort Augustus, Invermariston, Foyers River or the Leats Mouth, Urquhart Castle, and there's also Tor Point. You know, it may well be that one male or one female only occupies each area. Consider less inbreeding, maybe long lives, rarely breeding, and high mortality rates for the young. Based on the Kelly Chi photos and the observational work of Team Nessie on Nessie Cam, I think currently there are 2 juvenile Nessies swanning beneath, and sometimes on the surface of Loch Ness. Check out YouTube, Team Nessie. Once again, I am going to back up a bit. Now that's not a bad thing. Consider you really do want information. And of course, I urge you to also double-check things out for yourself and make up your own minds. In the end, someday, hopefully, we will find out what Nessie and indeed all the other lake creatures are about. That said, I feel sure each will reveal more and more of the work of God's great hands. The thing I want to clarify is this. Adrian Shine and others who examined the mud at the bed of the loch say there is not trace of sea salt. Okay, but did you know that even agitated, 16 centimeters below and fresh water does not mix with salt water? Rains are fresh. You know, I could go through all the hoaxes, and actually I am going to do that. But with a difference, as you may expect, it's true. Hoaxers make it very difficult for the person who genuinely reports things, but hold fire before you start jeering inside in agreement. I mean, if these colourful plonkers did not bring Nessie into the mainstream and even help keep it alive as the most famous of cryptids, you would not be that interested. So let's just salute what I believe was a cultural colonial urge to be like bygone famous explorers of lore and legend. To hoaxers of the future, don't bother. The tech will show you up rather fast, like, stay home, open your laptop. Before I embark on a roll call of famous sightings and known hoaxes, and yes, I will also give my opinion on them. Hey, it's my vid, isn't it? Well then, firstly, would like to mention that like the Baudet film, that only a few eyes have allegedly seen, well, you know, Loch Ness also has such a film stuck with lawyers. Whether it really exists even, who knows? So it's called the McRae film. Shot in the 60s, it has 2 different creatures featured. One at the sea loch, Duick, the other, Loch Ness, in the Great Orme of Loch Ness. Holiday interviewed a chap who claimed to have had a viewing, similar to each other, fluxing necks, slightly different manes. Yes, manes. If I remember well, both also had snail-like horns on their heads. Both had necks that seemed to be in a continuous flux. There is an on-land sighting at Whitefield by a couple driving by the loch in that era, but later, they said the neck shot across the road in a worm-like manner, sort of fluxing. So back to the film. The Loch Duick one had a tufted fibrous mane, and the neck was low over the water, and the Ness one had a more stranded fibrous mane, both approx 150 feet from the camera. That said, cameras were not like they are today. So, with mindless cam shake and dipsticks trying to look past viewfinders, it makes crappy footage, even with quality tech. Now you may be understanding why Holiday came to the conclusion of a mollusk. Well, in the film, the guy who claims he saw it said they seem to have a sheen on them, and Holiday alludes to the mucus that snails have. Maybe, whatever. Could well be right. It's my opinion that these and other unknown lake creatures will prove to be new phylum. You know, everyone tends to bend evidence or testimony to suit their theories. Have I? Well, I hope not. I offer info, testimonies, and my opinions. As said, I urge you to research and form your own opinions. Get out there, wow us all and discover the truth of the Loch Ness monster. And by the way, stick to the truth. Nothing but truth. That said, let's get on with witness reports. Well, most famous. Well, I think so. Tim Dinsdale. Google him. Briefly. Well, he saw a hump from an elevated position on the shore, started filming as it surged away to the opposite shore, left turned, progressed not far from that shoreline, then submerged. Best analyzers were Jarek. Official military source. Conclusion was, probably animate. Yes, probably. So what do I say, having seen it and listened to both sides of opinions? Well, I am going to hark back to my 1988 trip. I was near Urquhart Castle when I noticed something like a hump at roughly the same range, lifted my cam. Yes, it was the hump. And then I pressed the auto zoom button. And yes, it was a friggin' boat, moving away as well. For all the world, if I hadn't had the zoom, I too may have convinced myself that I was Dinsdale Mark II. However, this is, and always was, a search for the true Nessie by me, and nothing short. So I make no fancy claims. So what do I think of Tim Dinsdale? Well, as I just pointed out, you can be tricked without realizing things. Do I believe him? Yes, I do. Do I believe his testimony? Yes, but only as he recognized it. Do I believe the footage depicts Nessie? Not so sure. I mean, can you blame me? Without modern tech, we would have many Dinsdale-like films. Right, so previously I gave my salute to these guys making fanciful claims. Well, no more Mr. Nice Guy. It gets short and even brutal. Okay, so Hugh Gray. It's a photo of a grey hump with a snaky neck thing, head in the water. Once again, I will refer to the Great Orme book. There was a plate, that's an old term for picture nowadays, of that said photo. As a junior export clerk, I would spend my lunch breaks staring at these photos. You know, I'd swear this photo even had front paddles lined in. Don't blame Holiday. Nah, publishers wanted books sold. So what do I think? Most definitely a dog, his dog's head. Advantage of old cams. Just claim anything you want to. I can guess what you're wondering. Heck, Lex, what of the surgeon's photo? Well, for starters, it was not even his photo. That's if we are to believe the hoax claim. But it is true to say, a dead man cannot defend himself, so steady on. You know, it's on the cover of the Orme of Loch Ness, sort of a stylized version. Used to wonder how it could be 5 foot tall. Waves looked too small. You know, there is a second photo, not spoke of these days. I suppose it doesn't fit the current narrative. It's the trend these days. It's called cancel culture. If it does not fit your narrative, then just cancel it out. They are even doing it to Jesus Christ. God help us all. Next up, the Spicers. Mentioned them earlier. You know, the couple driving along. As said before, this as brief as I can, there is a lot of good stuff by other people giving more details. Research, research, research. My works cover things unmentioned elsewhere. So stay with me as well. I appreciate it. On we go. There have been a couple of sketchy land sightings. Yeah, sketchy. I am more confident that the Spicers really did witness something cross the road in front of them, way back in the 1930s, when it was a more narrow rural track than it is these days. You know, since they built that road around the loch, it's very unlikely that anyone will get such events. They did a drawing and gave verbal descriptions of what they saw. The main body was a bulbous grey mass, filling out the road. It sort of lumbered into view from the scrub, left to right, but not before its neck shot out, fluxing like a worm ahead of it. The road could not have been more than 12 feet wide or so, but most contentious was a baton-like object where its shoulder should have been. Swinging. George Spicer said it looked like a lamb. Anyways, it slid down into the loch. There are a few things I feel I should address here. Firstly, the baton-like object, because there is another very famous photo. Yeah, the Sandra Mancy photo. Heard of it? I am trying not to go off topic here. The Loch Ness monster. Because Sandra Mancy, God rest her soul, took a famous photo and made the creature of Lake Champlain also a very famous cryptid. However, I have for some time contended that the Mancy photo does not show what she and others claim it shows. No, she was not a liar. Due respect to her, she is not with us now. However, I have read her account. She did see the head and neck. There was a lot of excited shouting while her husband got the camera. These things don't hang about while you fetch cameras. Heck no. So she turns with the cam and snaps a picture. So let me give you my take on what we see. Delving deeper into this photo. So I am going to relate another eyewitness on Lake Champlain. Okay, this guy is out on the lake in a small boat. He sees an object, a mass, a distance away and heads out towards it. He claims it was Champ. However, this so-called Champ was resting on its side. I must say that I came across this account after I had already formed my theory of the Manzi photo, but it gives credence to my theory. So I believe that as she turned to snap the photo, it rolled sideways and up came the floppy paddle. There is a sort of joint lower down that necks do not have, and to the right is the head sideways with an eye just visible on the surface. Think about this. I mean, TikTok, amongst many other YouTube vids, have many people not realizing what they actually captured. One could contend that she was more successful than she thought. It really is not likely that anyone can normally get a photo of one of their paddles in the air. So how did she give the wrong testimony? Well, she didn't. She said, like Dinsdale and others, at the time, what they thought they photographed, split seconds between lifting the cam and the creature's movement, super fast movement sometimes, as I mentioned in the Robert Stack series and Ogopogo. Nonetheless, it's a real photo and in wildlife terms supremely successful and very inspiring. Back to the spices and to the point I am trying to make, and it's this. In a fleeting moment, a paddle seen edge on and moving in a manner that it would swim in may well look like a baton shape that's swinging. Do they come on land? Well, for those who believe they may be some sort of plesiosaur, and that may involve laying eggs to reproduce, then it's highly likely that, yes, they had to come on land, like turtles, to lay their eggs. A reasonable train of thought, yes. Well, there is no other way to go about these things. Consider also that the 20-foot object swimming in the shadow of a 40-footer was a female. In Arthur C. Clarke's documentary, A Breeding Pair. As I said before, in my first job at 16 years of age, I would read 2 books at lunchtime. One was The Great Orm of Loch Ness, and the second I got a bit later. It was Nessie, by Frank Searle, cringed at by current researchers. But, as said before, he kept Nessie in the forefront, and did not pretend that fame and fortune was not part of his goals. Now all his photos are considered a load of cod's wallop. He did claim to witness a tiny Nessie, which is a coincidence, or maybe not. At school, a couple of years earlier, Mrs. Sutton, our retiring teacher, took her boat through Loch Ness and claimed she saw 2 of the same swimming in front of her boat on the way to Skye. There's the Lachlan Stewart fake, and then there's the Peter McNabb photo. They say it's a fake, that is it's a wake of a boat. Not so sure about that. There are modern dodgy ones, like the pretty obvious 3 seals swimming together, a grey hump taken from a boat. The guy is still active on the loch, but he is now a more serious watcher. You know, Nessie can have bragging rights around the loch. Then there's the Gordon Holmes footage. Excellent stuff. Very real. Could be anything. But hold on, guess what? Ran it on my laptop, then took a smartphone still. Try it. Not very scientific. Sent it to Adrian Shine, by email. He thanked Gordon, Specsavers. So to the latest ones I find really interesting. Firstly, the YouTube channel Team Nessie. I congratulated them on the uploads, but inquired why no more vids. They told me they had violated the rule of Nessie Cam. Well, if uploading some of the best evidence of Nessie is wrong, then someone is more interested in money. That should come second, or not at all. So next up is the Kelly Chai photos. Well, the one I am referring to me, shows 2 heads. The top of them, the left eye of each, left nostril just above water to your left head smaller than the right one, maybe female, then a slightly bigger male, maybe juveniles. There are other photos of hers. So there are the long-term enthusiasts, let's call them that, eh? No disrespect intended, because it's hard to tell why they are still at the loch. Look, let's be honest, it's near impossible to disprove the non-existence of something. There is an Irish lake, they call them lochs, a small one. It had a strange creature. It dried up one time. Nothing there. Then the rains refilled it. Guess what? Sightings started up, with a witness daring to keep lying. Nah, I certainly don't think so. So, like I said, they maybe can bury under the mud or silt at the bottom till water comes or danger passes. So let's get back to the long-term Nessie watchers. Let's. Okay, Dick Rayner, well, he was part of the 60s Loch Ness project, an admirable effort by them all. However, for the time, they had some big lenses. Come on, Dick, did you join the I Wanna Be a Famous Nessie Hunter League? So he realizes now, after the surgeon's photo was deemed fake, that he had mistaken a flock of birds for Nessie. Nah, man. But tops for realizing they were birds. So Steve Feltham, hope he is still looking for Nessie. You know, for the time these guys spent there, we really should expect much more from them. Nessie cannot be smarter. Like I said, there must be a lot of bragging rights around the loch. Next up, Adrian Shine. The two gentlemen aforementioned also have something else in common with Adrian Shine. They all went there thinking, heck, this should be easy. Spend enough time there, the results come in. Then when there are no real results, Nessie becomes a large sturgeon in their heads. They become victims of the delusion they think Nessie eyewitnesses are suffering from. In the real world, the loch has had no evidence of any sturgeon being in its waters. It becomes a case of, if Nessie won't reveal herself to me, then she cannot be real. Now, Nessie is no god. But atheists think in very similar ways. The God delusion is an atheist delusion only. God is Jesus.